All right, and we are back. Peanut Gallery. Heckling from the hard camera. What are we talking about?
All right, well, like I said before the break, the title of this topic is called Backlash and Forth with single-brand pay-per-views. So we're going to talk about the history of single-branded pay-per-views, and the reason I picked this topic was because every single time they switched back and forth from single-branded to dual-branded pay-per-views was always the pay-per-view after WrestleMania.
Right.
It being the pay-per-view after WrestleMania, I thought it was an appropriate time to do so. So let's go over a little bit of history here before I get to kind of the pros and cons of single-branded pay-per-views to kind of see what you guys think. So pay-per-views are the biggest money makers in general for these companies like UFC, boxing, WWE, amongst other branded, companies like that. WWE is a company that's had a pay-per-view every single month, and they've had this since 1996, and sometimes they've had more than one pay-per-view each month.
I think like the most I've seen was like 15 pay-per-views in a year.
Yep. So when WWE makes, when fans make their decision about whether or not to purchase a pay, now this was of course pre-WWE Network, pre-Peacock, whatever that is, where people actually had to purchase pay-per-views. Oftentimes people look at the match card, the storylines, and the wrestlers participating in the show. After the Alliance storyline ended in late 2001, the company found itself overcrowded with talent, and this is something that we saw, with the draft and everything like that happening. This is when the company created brands. The brands were then created into weekly television programs called Raw and SmackDown. After WrestleMania 18, WWE had both of their brands compete at every pay-per-view event. It actually wasn't until late 2002 when WWE started labeling with brands representing the events. WWE Bad Blood was the first exclusive pay-per-view produced for the Raw brand.
Yep.
And I think it was Goldberg and
Triple H
in the main event, if I'm not mistaken about that. The first ever pay-per-view that was...
I do know Kane was involved. I think that was a triple threat, if I'm not mistaken. I could be very wrong about that, but Kane was like on top.
So, anyways, WWE continued to have their big four events, Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, and Survivor Series dual-branded. WWE No Way Out 2007 was the final brand-exclusive pay-per-view of that first era.
No Way Out?
No Way Out 2007.
Oh.
We're not talking about the new No Way Out, which was the first of the new iteration.
You just give me a picture for that, so I was just confused.
After WrestleMania 23, many fans were expecting Backlash to be represented by Raw, and you tune into SmackDown the following weekend, they announced their main event for Backlash. Did I hear that correctly? SmackDown main eventing Backlash? Remember, at this point in time, WWE had three brands, Raw, SmackDown, and ECW.
Right.
So after WrestleMania 23, they decided to drop the brand-exclusive pay-per-views. Now, there are a lot of speculation as to why they decided to drop it, the most notable of which being the disasters of pay-per-views in the winter leading up to WrestleMania 23. You can talk about December to December all day long.
Right.
But even before WrestleMania 23, they were toying around with, non-Big Four pay-per-views having multiple brands in it, as we saw during December to Dismember, amongst many other events. And so after that, you expected Judgment Day to be presented by SmackDown. Guess what? Raw and ECW were also represented in Judgment Day. So you knew at that point on, wrestling events would be dual, tri-branded, whatever the case may be.
Right.
When each pay-per-view was brand exclusive, WWE could use all of their talent in one event. With a month in between each brand exclusive pay-per-view, WWE could have built up more storylines. That was one of the pros. One of the cons is, of course, the fact that there's only one brand represented, which, depending on how popular the wrestlers are in each show, could contribute to less pay-per-view buy rates, and it really just depends on the event itself.
And you definitely saw that with the 2003 Raw pay-per-views had a really strong main event scene, but not a really good undercard. But then SmackDown literally had the opposite.
Right. And then, of course, in 2016, the WWE did their rebrand extension, their first event coming back into the single brand was their No Mercy pay-per-view, which was the first ever SmackDown exclusive pay-per-view.
This was SmackDown Live.
SmackDown Live's exclusive, and this lasted for about a year and a half until they dropped it before WrestleMania 34.
You see, I love exclusive.
And so, let's talk a little bit about that, because I'm done with the story part of the whole brand exclusivity pay-per-views. But let's talk about the pros and cons of brand exclusive pay-per-views. What do you like most about brand exclusive pay-per-views?
So what I like about these is that I felt like, even with the current today's standards, I felt like there was even more competition within the brands. Okay. They wanted to make sure that they gave the best pay-per-view, and they knew that every storyline had to be top-notch to succeed in that. Mm-hmm. In 2002, you had the SmackDown 6, Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Kurt Angle, Edge, Rey Mysterio, and I'm missing somebody, but Chris Benoit. And you knew that when they were in a match, they were always going to have great things. Right. You had the solid first ever WWE Tag Team Champions with Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle. Right. You had the Cruiserweight division, which was always, even though it wasn't star-studded, you knew that it was going to be a great opener. Right. But then you had that solid main event scene with your people like Undertaker, Brock Lesnar, blah, 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 on SmackDown. But then when you go to Raw, you had Rob Van Dam Kane, Booker T Goldust, the Dudley Boys were on Raw. But then you had that great main event scene with Kane, Triple H, Goldberg, Chris Jericho, Christian. I mean, the standards of it were so on the top that you had to make sure that was the best thing, because you wanted people to buy it again. Right. And you don't see that really with a dual branded, because there are only a certain amount of spots that are divvied up. And at that point, it's not based on work ethic of wrestlers. It's based on what is the most popular. Right. And the most popular should be particularly saved for the big four. Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, Survivor Series, and SummerSlam. That's it. Right. That structure works because you can use the smaller pay-per-views from each brand to build to a big match for SummerSlam to get people invested into that. Right. You lose that when every fucking show is a dual branded. You lose that component of storytelling. That's just me. Okay. What are your cons on single branded pay-per-views? The cons is that I feel like sometimes a branded pay-per-view can look good on the card, but then in execution it sucks. We have seen weird, ridiculous storylines play out in an overall good rivalry. And also the problem with a single brand, especially with as an example, the current SmackDown brand, there aren't a lot of guys that are at least in the title picture, because that's what you want. Do you want Universal, Intercontinental, or Tag Team? Right. Or even the women's if you're a woman. There aren't really a lot of people who can, to be honest with you, verifiably go for these championships. Tamina and Natalya just won the WWE Women's Tag Team Champions. They're not going to go towards the SmackDown or Raw Women's Champions anytime soon, because they're focused on that. And Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler are going to continue to pursue the Tag Team Champions, which is whatever. But then you have somebody like Roman Reigns. Who the fuck do you think can face Roman Reigns at this point other than Cesaro? They haven't built anybody. And unfortunately, because now they're all dual branded, you don't have the option of building a smaller rivalry around two particular individuals to build as somebody to be the next contender. Right. You don't have that. And that's a component that's now going to be lost. You can lose a lot of great matches that can really put somebody on such a different level because you lose the length of booking.
Right.
And that's something that you lose with a monthly or bi-monthly single branded pay-per-view.
Right.
And that's just me. Peanut Gallery, do you have anything to add to that?
Or so I think the biggest pro to it is content, and I think that's a double-edged sword. Mm-hmm. I think that having a lot of content is a good thing, especially for a network that's looking for fresh content all the time.
Right.
At the same time, when WWE reintroduced the dual-branded concept, they had 2 pay-per-views going each month, except for the month between Royal Rumble and WrestleMania. The problem with that is people only have so many Sundays that they're willing to devote to wrestling. I myself am one of them. What I like about single branded or dual branded pay-per-views is that it is it's just one pay-per-view a month that I have to devote myself to. And yes, I do understand that the storylines, you probably don't get a lot of exposure to them because we're only watching, really all we watch are pay-per-views leading up to this point. But, I think that if they want to go back to single-branded pay-per-views, there has to be some sort of compromise made. I've always been a big proponent of dual-night pay-per-views. And I'd
be okay with that.
I would love to see one brand one night, one brand the other night, for example, for pay-per-views, and people can just choose what night they want to watch the pay-per-view on.
If you were going to talk about compromises, here's something that I was thinking because it's becoming more and more popular. What about something like what Impact does with
with Impact Plus?
Right, with like a Peacock exclusive event. And WWE was doing that with the network for a little bit there,
right? Where they have some of those lesser rivalries,
right,
interspaced with a big match or two,
right? And it's like, okay, you can start something there and continue on, but they just don't do that anymore. I'm sorry, go ahead. It was just something that kind of popped in my mind. I'm like, ooh, that'd be a really good idea.
And again, the other thing too is just buy rates. I think it would help with buy rates, but again, I think if people's money and penny is stretched too thin, they're gonna compromise elsewhere. They're gonna not watch certain things.
It's not
it's not as big as a problem as it used to be.
Right, and that's the thing. It's $9. I pay $9.99 for commercial free Peacock.
Right.
We never had an issue with Peacock. We watch other shows with it, so you get more content.
And like I said, I think the biggest thing now is just time. And
time is something I'll never get back. I can always get back $9.99, but I can never get back 3 hours of bullshit.
Right. I think that WWE's rosters in general are too small to do single branded pay-per-view. I think that if there was more depth, it would make sense. The other thing too is if you want to have a single branded pay-per-view, it cannot be a gimmick pay-per-view.
Right.
You cannot have...
You can't do that anymore.
You can't do the gimmick pay-per-views. Nope. Now, on the other hand, where I can see that work is if they switch the gimmicks every year. So they did like Hell in a Cell SmackDown one year, Raw the next year, SmackDown Raw. They didn't do that, though. They didn't do that the second time. The first time around, there weren't really any gimmick pay-per-views.
Right. And we'll talk more about gimmick pay-per-views maybe when we run into another one, which is going to be in June.
Right.
But I understand where you're coming from.
So anyways, I think that, again, I think that dual-branded pay-per-views are really a double-edged sword.
They really are.
I think you really have to understand the times and the dynamics upon which these wrestling promotions were and where they were at the time and what the depth of the roster looked like. Like when WWE's roster got really small back in the 2010s, they merged everything together and made one brand.
Right.
And then it got large again. And then they created 2 brands. And I think it just ebbs and flows in these cycles. In fact, I see them merging back into a single brand before I see them doing single branded pay-per-views again.
I definitely can see that, too.
That's just the ebbs and flows of the wrestling industry.
I can 100% see that, and I don't want to see that again.
Right.
I really don't.
I don't think they will because of NXT, but at the time, back in the 2010s when they were really struggling,
right?
You really saw that they were just kind of merging things together. But anyways, That's kind of what I had. Do you have anything else to add?
I really don't. So when we come back, I will be talking about the history of Backlash.